So, as expected, a Muslim was again re-elected as the Mayor of London. Muslims were also elected to various other mayoral positions throughout the UK. And I'll make a point to mention that they are Muslims because that is the very reason they were elected. In fact, it is likely the only reason why they were elected. There are apparently about 1.4 million Muslims in London, and it does seem as if everyone that was eligible to vote did vote for Khan. Of course, I don't know this for sure. I'm assuming. It's possible I'm wrong, since in a mature democracy, one of the foundations of that is the concept of the secret ballot. And although it may be tempting to suggest that that very secrecy, designed to insulate voters from threats from fellow voters or activists, has been corrupted by cheats, and it has, but the margin of his victory was so great as to be irrelevant. By the democratic process that we all live under, as far as it goes, his win was legitimate. But hey, that's democracy, isn't it? That's what all us Brexiteers said, wasn't it? Can't complain about it now. At least that's what they tell us, anyhow. And when they tell us that, what they're actually telling us is what many of us have been saying for some time, namely, that there is no voting our way out of this. But there should be. It should be quite simple. It should be the simplest thing in the world. All those people, largely white British people, I imagine, who don't want to live under an absolutist, intolerant, and totalitarian religion in a surveillance state where you must pay to travel in your own vehicle, in your own city, should have just exercised their democratic rights. Although using the word exercise to describe walking no more than 10 minutes, putting a cross on a piece of paper, and walking back is overselling it somewhat, and voting for the candidate that promised not to instigate such things. It sounds pretty simple to me, and it also sounds as if it's not particularly onerous either. I've been saying for some time that people don't have to live and breathe politics in order to be involved. One doesn't have to be an activist, nor does one have to march in the streets every weekend, hand out leaflets, or dye their hair green. You just have to do something. And the very, very bare minimum that you have to do is show up to vote, even if you spoiled a ballot paper. Even that says something, something definite. But not showing up also says something. It's vague, as is everything that is undefined, but it does say something. But the trouble with things that are undefined is that what they say can be interpreted, unchallenged, by others. Voting for Sadiq Khan says that you want him to be mayor. Voting against him says that you do not want him to be mayor. Turning up and spoiling your ballot paper is also somewhat vague, but it does at least signal some kind of dissatisfaction. But not turning up may say all sorts of things, most of them very negative things about the character of the no-show. It might be interpreted as that you trust the electoral system completely, and that you have an implicit and unshakable trust in your fellow citizens to make the correct decisions without your input. At the very least, it also says that you are a freeloader who is content to let everyone else do the work. Although, as I've said, voting once every 5 years can hardly be described as work. But one of the most significant things it says, as well as the most generous, is that you don't mind. That you don't mind what happens to society. It says that whatever happens is just fine by you. COVID showed us just how commonplace this attitude is. No matter how ridiculous, how illogical, or how unprincipled the new rules were, you were fine with it. You were completely fine with the bulldozing of centuries-old British and English customs, protocols and laws, as well as being completely fine with more recent but well thought out principles in international codes and law, such as the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code was specifically written in response to a situation where one powerful group of people were doing medical experiments on a much less powerful group of people without their consent. But these people, the ones who appear to be quite content with anything that the state does to them, tend to be the ones that say things like trust the science, trust the experts, and the greater good. And how do we imagine the Nazis justified their brutal medical experiments on Jews, gypsies, and prisoners of war? I have asked people if there was anything that the government might do to them that they would object to. They tell me that there is, but they've yet to tell me what specifically, because they didn't object to being told to stay home, not to travel, to close their businesses, to keep their children from school, whose house they can visit, who they can invite into their home, who they can have sex with, that they must cover their faces and rebreathe their own air and do the same to their children. They didn't object to being told that they must take a novel and never before tried cocktail of chemicals into their bodies. They didn't object to that same cocktail being injected into the obviously healthy bodies of their own children, and they didn't object to being told that they cannot visit their dying parents on their deathbeds, when the one thing, the only thing that those parents wanted, more than anything else, more even than life itself, was to have their very own children with them at the end. So I asked them again, what precisely would you object to? Because as far as I can see, they will agree to almost anything the government might decide to do to them, especially if the man on the television tells them to. So this is why Sadiq Khan was re-elected to be mayor of the largest city in Britain, a city 4 times larger than any other. This is why a man who promises to make travel dependent upon his permission, the kind of permission that has not been required since feudal times, was re-elected. These people, the ones who never bothered to vote, seem not to mind about that. They seem not to mind that the poorest of their fellow Londoners have now been degraded to the status of second-class citizens. But I suppose they do not mind that somebody else's freedom of movement has been curtailed, so long as theirs hasn't. Depressingly, as if all this wasn't depressing enough, they also seem to not mind that they are now under total surveillance whenever they get in their cars. But that's another story for another video. Just as they didn't mind that care home workers were sacked for refusing to be force medicated. What is astonishing is that not only do these people not mind about what happens to other people, they seem also to not really mind what might happen to them. Anything is acceptable just so long as nothing at all is required of them. Anything that the authorities do to them is just fine and dandy, just so long as they do not have to do anything as onerous as walking to a polling station, which are open until 10 o'clock at night, by the way, picking up a pencil and putting a cross on a piece of paper. So long as the state doesn't require them to do that, then the state can do whatever it likes. These are the people that will drag us politely to hell. These polite, neighbourly, jovial, friendly people that you chat with about the weather will drag us to hell, because these people offer the path of least resistance to the globalists, to the Marxists and to the Islamists. These are the tolerant types that we hear so much about when discussing British values. These are the people that will never complain, not because they don't want to, but simply because it will be considered rude or bad form. I mean, they'll grumble in that British way, but they'll never complain. It's only dreadful grubby little oiks like Tommy Robinson that complain. A perfect example of this in popular culture is in the Monty Python film The Life of Brian, and it is one of those brilliant tiny moments that you don't really notice on your first viewing that makes the film such a masterpiece. Leading up to the final crucifixion scene, where the condemned are forced to carry their own crosses to the crucifixion site, a supposedly humane individual is watching the procession with horror and decides to indulge in some performative compassion. He approaches one of the condemned and says, "Let me shoulder your burden, brother." The surprised criminal allows him to help, and as soon as the Roman soldiers are looking the other way, buggers off and leaves the other bloke carrying his cross. This good and kind character then realises his mistake and he stops to watch the criminal escape. Only then does a Roman soldier intervene because of the hold-up. "Come on, get moving," he says. "We haven't got all day." To which the man, who doesn't wish to cause a fuss, replies, Yes, of course," and continues to carry the other man's cross, presumably to his death. He would rather go to his death than cause a fuss. And these are people who'd rather go to their deaths than be associated with Tommy Robinson, for example. And presumably, because I have seen zero evidence to the contrary, that they would allow their 10-year-old daughter to go and entertain those nice young chaps at the mosque, rather than risk causing offence. And for those that deny that such things will happen, those things that just don't happen will happen more and more after Sadiq Khan's legitimate election victory. Already we are importing the ridiculous lawlessness that is characterising American cities such as Philadelphia, Chicago, and those in California, where one can steal over $900 worth of merchandise without any legal sanction. This will be further tolerated, as it is in California, as a kind of unofficial reparations for the evils of slavery or colonialism or something. And although the characterisation of Britain as being a high trust society has been rubbished, as it always is, by the left and the race vultures, it cannot be denied. There is no way on earth that that kind of trust can be replaced with enforcement, with only 130,000 police officers to police a country of over 70 million. Trust, that ill-defined and mercurial thing, is what makes it work, and what has improved our society incrementally over the past 1,000 years. Presumably the Somalian machete gangs will get in on this almost risk-free action as well. And the well-spoken, well-mannered, polite and thus far affluent middle classes will ignore it and at the same time congratulate themselves that they voted for that nice Sadiq Khan rather than that hated Tory Susan Hall. And then, if they can, they'll move out and continue in their delusion, safely ensconced in the shires. For now. And the ones that can't move out will wonder why the police aren't protecting them from the Somalian machete gangs that now seem to be everywhere, even outside their children's schools, loitering menacingly in their AMG Mercedes and their Range Rover Sports. And if they do complain, they will almost certainly get a visit from the police. Not with reassurance or with offers of protection, but instead with warnings about not spreading hate. A non-crime hate incident will be logged against the complainers. And then maybe they will begin to wonder if they have got it all wrong. Maybe. Even at this stage, it will still be unlikely, since the credentialed midwit class never get things wrong, unlike those unpleasant racist types, the ones that they are so obviously superior to. But internally, they might actually begin to acknowledge that the people that they most disparage for their supposedly regressive, low status and unacceptable views might actually have a point. That the people that they most wanted to be wrong, the ones they most despised, were the only ones telling the truth. And when they get a visit from the local community leaders, perhaps even accompanied by a community liaison officer of the Metropolitan Police, telling them that it has been reported to them that their daughter, their blossoming teenage daughter, is dressing disrespectfully, and that she must cover up to adhere to the new dress code, and that her safety cannot be guaranteed, and that furthermore, any harm that may come to her will not be because their followers are unable to control themselves like civilized human beings, as has been the case for literally hundreds of years in this country, but because she has flagrantly provoked their passions and will consequently deserve anything she gets. And as those community leaders leave that open, liberal, smug metropolitan with his thoughts, he will wonder where his and his family's protection will come from. Perhaps then he will begin to realise that the only people that are willing and capable of protecting him will be those he least wants to be his protectors, the ones whose protection he least deserves, the ones he has hated, belittled and demonised the most. Because it will be his fellow Englishmen that are the ones, the only ones, that can prevent him and us from being dragged into hell.